Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of Fractional Futures, where in each episode, I'm speaking to fractional leaders across the globe. My purpose is to get their perspectives on how the fractional leadership model is being embraced by the business landscape. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Susan Findlater, who is a fractional CMO in Canada. Hi, Susan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Paul. Thank you for having me.
So I guess us Brits, we're always obsessed by the weather. So I guess we're both approaching autumn, winter. What's the weather like where you are? Are you expecting snow, or is the snow disappearing?
Well, I'm in Ontario. I'm not far from Toronto, so we keep pretty mild weather. Still a little bit of summer weather coming through, but I've started to get out my sweaters. I'm ready for sweater weather. I think it's coming next week. If we were in Calgary or somewhere else, we'd be getting some snow, but not yet here in Ontario.
I've had it. Anyway, enough about the weather. Before we jump in and talk about fractional, can you give us, our listeners, a little bit about your background before you got into the fractional space?
Yeah, absolutely. So you said I'm from Canada, from the beautiful country of maple syrup and hockey and national parks. And that's really great. My background has mostly been in growth and financial services. So I actually found myself deeply in love with a non-traditionally sexy industry of subprime lending. Don't know too many people that say that they love, high interest rate loans, but I truly did love that world. And that's where most of my career has been spent before I pivoted over into the works of credit scores and reporting, actually working for a UK-based organization as they were emerging in the Canadian landscape. And then after about a year at that startup, I really realized I wanted to work with startups all the time. I just loved the type of work that they were doing. I wanted to help them grow and flourish. And I was passionate about not letting them be taken advantage of by agencies or other people that didn't have their best intentions in mind. So I branched out, started my own fractional gig about a year ago. And now I've dabbled into some other industries outside of fintech, which is kind of my core bread and butter of the area of expertise. But I've dabbled into legal tech, some prop tech, and some clean tech now.
Fantastic stuff. So how did you discover the fractional model? Why did it appeal to you?
I think it really all starts with my husband, interestingly, and it starts with not even marketing at all. He's very into alternative ways of building wealth. And we exchange this phrase often a lot called living life on your terms. And that was really about alternative ways of building wealth where you don't have to trade your time for money. A fractional is trading your time for money, right? But it is a smart way of trading your time for money. So he was really interested in alternative ways of earning income and different ways of working. And it was at a time where I was really ready to pivot into something different. Outside of being a fractional CMO, the hat I wear at home is mommy, 2 small boys, 4 and 5 years old. And I just really had to reflect on what I wanted to in life and how I wanted to work. I still loved working, but I needed an alternative way of working because I really wanted to, refuse to compromise on the things that mattered most to me, which was really being present around my kids. So around this time that I was at this fintech and I was working with all these startups and seeing how they were, struggling with their marketing because they were lean teams. And I also had this interest in working differently to be more present around my kids. I stumbled across, I think a fairly acknowledged podcast over here in North America that was Casey Stanton's The Fractional CMO show. I started listening to it and I hadn't really been exposed to fractional much. I had heard a lot about consulting and so on. And then I heard about fractional where it was people with a seasoned experience at a more executive level or higher level that wanted to drop into an organization, help and be present and do projects of impact that aligned with their personal interests and values, picking those organizations, but didn't want to be there full time. And that really attracted me because I knew that I would have the ability to take on as much work or as little work as I needed to based on the season of life that I was going through. So it's really just this mixture of working differently, trying to work smarter, trying to be more present around my kids, and doing work of impact that when I combined all those needs that I had in my life, really made this fractional world make a lot of sense for myself.
I don't know Casey very well, but I do know his podcast, and he's obviously doing a very good job. He's one of the prominent fractional brands in the US. So what challenges have you had to overcome to transition from your previous career into this portfolio work style?
Oh my gosh, so many challenges, pivoting to a whole different way of working, easily time management, scheduling my time. You don't have just one boss anymore. You have multiple bosses, right? And bosses have needs and demands. And so balancing multiple clients at once can be challenging, especially if you don't structure your time properly. I know some fractionals will give a certain day of the week for each client. I flexed mine a little bit more, and I'm still working on figuring out what the best approach for that would be. But I would say time management was a big one. Definitely business development is, for someone being in marketing, it's very hard to market yourself. Like, you want to be perfect. You don't want to put yourself out there till you know exactly how you should be talking about yourself and have built your brand. And strumming up that business continuously and selling yourself continuously, it's exhausting. You have to kind of find strategies to do it that feels very genuine and authentic. So learning that over the course of the past year has been an interesting challenge. And I think the biggest challenge of all for me was really imposter syndrome. And I think, we face that anywhere we go. But for me, I know some people listening in, they can't see me to verify this, but I'll just share it anyways. I am on the younger side. I'm in my early 30s. And that age and the gap and experience of myself in comparison to the average executive could easily and has easily caused me to have some self-doubt. If you look at what the average CMO, their age and their profile of who they are, they're typically around in their younger 50s. And so someone even in their younger 50s has, 20 plus years of experience on me. So just thinking about how to position myself to bring forward my skills in comparison to someone who maybe has technically more experience was something that I worked with a lot to get over, really that imposter syndrome.
Is there an age group where you think actually you're probably too young to be a fractional? Or is it just really all about the expertise and the experience? Because you can still be young and have a lot of expertise or experience in a certain niche that maybe someone like me in their 50s doesn't necessarily have. How do you sort of navigate that?
I would start by saying the perception that experience only comes with age is not true. Expertise and experience comes from challenges navigated and things that you've worked through, not the number of years that you've worked. So I have been through mergers and acquisitions, rebranding. I've worked for enterprise, corporate companies, startups, and I've compacted all that experience into, 10, 12 years in the market. And, we all accelerate in our positions at different rates. Fortunately, I had a rapid acceleration into a more senior role at a bank that I was at earlier in my career that exposed me to a lot of conversations that maybe would have taken others a lot longer to get there and to be at the table in those types of conversations. And I think that to your question really about, are there certain companies that maybe because I'm younger and I haven't had 20 years experience, I'm not the right fit for? Yes, but I think no matter our age, fractional CMOs are not the right fit for every organization regardless, right? We all have a sort of area of expertise, whether that be growth marketing or brand marketing or some area of strength that makes us the right fit for certain organizations and not the others. And so I think I don't have to be the right fit for 90% of them or 50% of them. I just have to be the right fit for 10% of them and find those organizations and position myself. In the Canadian startup ecosystem, there are lots of younger founders. And so I find myself, being around the same age as a lot of these companies that I work for and work alongside. And I think it's easy for us to relate about stages of life, to have easy conversations, to have a bond outside of the professional world as well. That makes me the right fit for certain organizations.
Yeah, no, I totally get all of that, and I totally buy into it. And I guess that probably brings me on to my next question, Susan, is around the market, the business landscape in Canada. How has the fractional model been embraced by Canada? So are you as advanced as the United States, or are you slightly behind? Is it about the same?
I love that. Well, just back to your point about saying people trying to put some frameworks around what a fractional CMO looks like. I have not come to heads or come up against anything here in Canada that says, no, Susan, you don't fit the profile. You can't be a fractional CMO. And well, whether people have thought that and not said that to me, I mean, that's definitely possible. But given the experiences I've had over the past year in the business I've built, I would say that that's not the case. So I think it's not to the point where people are trying to restrict it in that regards. I think Canada, it's still fairly early and still fairly niche. So there are people emerging out and saying, this is the way I want to work. And I think we are bearing the brunt of trying to educate these companies that we want to work with on what our unique value proposition is, because they haven't come across it before. We often talk about not wanting to be the very first in the industry, right? Because then you have to spend all your time on the education. So there has been some of that groundwork done, but we're, emerging and defining it for the country at the same time. So I have been at some networking events recently, and senior level marketers, I introduce myself and talk about what I do, and I explain fractional CMO. And I would say they've heard of it, but they don't necessarily get it or how it will work or how to get started. So educating the professionals themselves is part of the task to be done, along with educating the organizations and then how we can work together. I think when you start to, if you get the opportunity to have the conversation, you talk about like, look, you can get me as a seasoned expert. You don't have to commit to me, write down this hefty contract. You don't have to have the full-time cost commitment. I'm going to bring these benefits. Why don't we give it a go, have a test run of this? It makes sense. And oftentimes, there is interest. Sometimes it's not the right time, but I think they're receptive to the model, yes.
And I guess that leads on nicely to the clients you work with at the moment. Now they've experienced what the fractional model looks and feels like. What do they say to you now?
I would say one advantage of this fractional model is you just feel like another member of the team. And for all intents and purposes, you're just maybe only there 7-10 hours, but you look and feel to everyone else and to the outside world like you are a regular full-time member of the team. You laugh with the team, you attend the team meetings with them, like you are part of that team. So I think the feedback I have received from the organizations I've worked with, they really like the model. I mean, I am there for when they need me. I am still getting the work done, but they're not bearing, the hefty overhead cost of if I was there full time. So it has been really positive. But I do think the organizations like that I have had the pleasure of working with, they were ahead of the crowd anyways, where they were leveraging fractional legal officers, fractional CEOs. So it may be slightly skewed by the fact that they are already aware of these types of models.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask if you were the first fractional leader in those organizations, or if they've already had exposure, and it sounds like some of them have. So I guess that familiarity with the model, it's kind of de-risking, bringing you in from the marketing perspective, it kind of de-risks, and they're quite happy to go along with it. Are you seeing in the clients where they may have 2 or 3 fractional leaders, is there one of the C-suite level where they're probably in longer than the others?
I think that the CFO has been there typically longer because they've been there to help set up the business in the first place and just been managing all those financials. And there's a great advantage to having that person throughout the entire longevity of the business. I've also noticed, like on the legal side, especially because organizations starting up, they really need that legal expertise and guidance to call on at any point. So I've noticed that individual has been around longer. And I was actually the last one to enter in some of these organizations. They had maybe a marketing operations manager, someone a little bit junior, and then they realized, okay, we need more strategy going on here. We need someone who truly knows marketing. And now that we've found a little bit of some product market fit, now we need to go en masse to the audiences and talk about this. So we need to bring in some expertise to execute on that side.
Fantastic. And you touched on it earlier. You said there's some clients are a little bit more ahead of the curve with the fractional model. In Canada, what sectors are embracing this model? Is it SaaS and tech, or how are the more traditional sectors like professional services, how are they adopting it?
Well, I think across all the sectors, there's lots of people waiting to see what happens, and then keeping an eye to see if it's something that would work for them or not. I do think predominantly it is like the tech sector that is employing individuals like this that work in this sense. Um, SaaS as well, especially because I think, you talk in your podcast about finding your niche and staying in that area. And so these people that have had extensive backgrounds, say in SaaS, like it's so advantageous for these startups in particular to get someone at that level. But also on the same side, these fractionals, they don't want to necessarily jump into another organization and commit full time, because the reason they came into fractional work-life balance, picking projects of impact that they wanted to work on, deciding how and when they wanted to work. I think the expertise that they need is in those individuals, but those individuals aren't willing to sign on full time. So the only way to access some of that expertise is to adapt and to bring this type of working into their organization. So by force, if they want that individual, they have to hire them in that capacity. And I think, when you outline and properly position why you work this way, it's easy to sell someone to get on board to give it a shot.
When you're networking, when you're prospecting and you're speaking to business owners who've got a marketing challenge and they're contemplating, is Susan the right person for us? Is it this leadership model, or do we go down the the traditional route of going to a recruitment company? What's the biggest misconception that you're hearing from those that are probably coming across this fractional model for the first time? What sort of stuff do you hear in Canada about the model and maybe the misconceptions?
I would say it's that I think this comes from both ends. I'll start with by the business employing these individuals and the individuals in terms of the work that they're going to do. It's just going to be oversight. Oftentimes it's not. And in particular, in my instance, I work with relatively small startups, that are going 0 to 1. You have to get your hands dirty too. And for some of us, it's been a long time since we did a lot of this dirty handwork. So you have to remind yourself how to do it, because you don't have a full extensive team to leverage. So you have to have this strategic oversight, but you have to easily be able to pivot right into doing the dirty work, getting your hands dirty, remembering how to, set up marketing campaigns directly in platforms too. So at times, you feel like an overpaid copywriter or an overpaid, digital marketing specialist. But that's not true, because you're pivoting between both these worlds, or you're balancing both those needs at the same time. At the same time, I'm setting up something on this ground level, I'm thinking through that whole strategy. You have to operate, lean and efficiently. You have to often wear that hat and do that work as well. So I think just educating that I'm not just sitting here looking at everything going on and directing people. There may not even be that many people to direct. I'm helping execute on that work as well. So strategic oversight, but also execution.
And what would you say to the marketers? Because you touched on it there really nicely about you don't have teams to leverage anymore when you come into this fractional career. You do have to do everything yourself. What advice would you give to marketers that are senior marketers? They're in the corporate world. They're coming into the second half of their career. They're thinking, do you know what? This fractional work style sounds quite appealing. I can pick and choose my clients. I can earn a good day rate or whatever. I don't have to work 4-5 days a week. It looks good. But for those that are probably thinking, actually, there's certain bits of marketing that I really like, but the business development side, I don't like that, or I really could do without doing LinkedIn every day. What advice would you give to those marketers who probably are coming into this with their eyes maybe not quite wide open?
Ooh. You know what? The first piece of advice I would say is listen to the first season of your podcast. I listened to it through, and I wish I would have listened to it even before I entered this world. It would have had me enter it with eyes more open and like understanding what the work was going to be. But the individual you brought in, Dan, you covered so much of, what needs to be thought of and considered before you enter this career in terms of like being very resilient, being adaptable, learning from rejection, finding support. There was so much great advice there. What a lot of people do fail to see or consider is how much you have to be, your number one cheerleader, your number one advocate. You have to talk about yourself all the time to everyone. And there is a certain level of to doing that stuff on LinkedIn. A lot of people feel uncomfortable with it. Even though we are marketers and we're happy to market a lot of other products, all of a sudden we have to market ourselves. I think there's a number of amazing courses out there to learn how to do it authentically, to just tell a story instead of feeling like you have to sell. Just tell a story that someone else can relate to and get people to be interested in your personal brand. And there's ways to do it that are more authentic, but you ultimately do have to do it. No one else is going to be, standing around marketing you for you. That's your responsibility. And then I think another thing for people to be very aware of when they enter this world is, outside of all the responsibilities that you have to your clients, that you feel a good sense of wanting to do right by them, you have a lot of responsibility for yourself. So you have to manage your books. You have to do all your financials, your invoicing and expense keeping, your business development. You are working for all these businesses to help them, but you are a business yourself. And so what I had made a mistake earlier on in my journey was really taking on so much work that I had a full caseload, and I was back 40, 50 hours a week working again, which is not why I entered this world, but I was just happy to have landed so many impactful clients that I wanted to work with. And then I realized on top of that, there was so much work I had to do just for myself. And I did really kind of reject building my brand, setting up a lot of those processes at first. Now, about a year later, I'm starting to do all that again, and it's better late than never, but not to underestimate how much time it takes to do that type of work for your own business.
That's really good advice. And the way I personally approach this is I treat my business as one of those clients of my portfolio, because it's very easy to get sucked into client work, and there is a natural tendency to slightly overservice because
Absolutely.
you want to do the right thing and you want to get the paycheck at the end of the month, and you want that testimonial because that's going to come in handy to win your next client down the line. But if you neglect your own business, then if you don't have the processes, if you don't have the right contracts, if you don't have the exposure, you're not going to last very long. And it's very important to, if you're one of these fractionals that says, right, I will allocate a day per client, make sure one of those days is you. Otherwise, you will quickly get consumed by client work, and then all of a sudden your business, it will stutter. It really will.
That's really good advice. Yes, set that one day aside for yourself as a client.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a full day. It might be a couple of hours every day, but make sure you allocate at least some time to do that good work. So Susan, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Is fractional leadership here to stay, and where do you think it's going to be in 5 years' time?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of evidence to prove that this way of working is definitely around to stay, and we're just kind of at the tip of explosion of this industry. On the businesses side, if you look in Canada, there's a huge startup ecosystem in Canada. There's 100,000 plus businesses that are started every year. And, at this time right now, we're also noticing that there are a number of resources in the tech industry, skilled workers who are getting laid off, or there's an industry shift going on. And in these times of downturns, when the talent pools are more available, you see surges in entrepreneurial endeavors. So you might see these skilled tech workers who are getting laid off elsewhere start to form their own startups. And this is amazing. And they're going to look for hiring expertise in a way that suits them at that stage of their business. So again, likely not able to afford someone full-time or not prepared for someone full-time, but needs specialized talent. And so that's exactly where the fractional inserts themselves to help them. So the startup ecosystem is really booming here in Canada. And then at the same time, so you have the businesses that are going to be in need of these individuals. Look at the individuals themselves and the professionals, and we notice a surge. Increasingly, more and more senior and executive level individuals are willing to trade off salaries for more flexibility in how they work. So they're willing to take a bit of a pay cut because they want to work remotely. They want to keep this work-life balance that they experienced in COVID. There are a lot of businesses going back into the office, and people are, feeling some of that burden and stress of commutes in and what the trade-off is for what they're not able to balance in terms of their personal life. And people have a remote work preference. And so they're looking for ways to do it differently. And I think that this is a great model for those individuals. Would say that they, have to have a high risk appetite, because I think this type of work, there's highs and lows. There's no guarantees of anything that you do. But these people are, intelligent and experienced, so they should be able to weather those storms as well.
Yeah. I personally think it's here to stay. I think the old-fashioned 9 to 5 work pattern is kind of done and dusted now. I think, it will still exist, but I think there will be more people wanting this fractional work style just because of human choice. Why should we be bogged down by having to work a certain work style where, if I want to work on a Saturday, not a Friday, I should have the human right to do that. But
Yeah,
because the company
absolutely.
traditionally doesn't work that way, because most companies are shut over the weekend. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see where it's going to be in the next 3 or 4 years' time. I certainly think that a lot of business leaders will think, why didn't we do this 10 years ago?
And what's also amazing is the opportunity to work for companies that are located elsewhere in the world and not have to physically relocate yourself there. So, I have a family here, I have young kids, and I have, no desire of picking up and moving, but I'm so happy to be exposed to opportunities to work for companies in the UK and elsewhere in this capacity, because I've always, I like that cultural learnings you get from working for these different organizations. There's certain countries where the industries bloom more than they are in Canada, so new opportunities open there. So it's a really great advantage that other people would be looking to have that type of working for those organizations as well. So this is one way of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just before we close, Susan, if there's anyone listening and they're in the UK and they want to move their company or open in Canada, you're probably a good person to speak to. So do you want to just sort of share a little bit about your own practice and what you do?
Yeah, of course. So anyone can find me on LinkedIn too, Susan Findlater. I love to help tech startups 0 to 1. You have an idea, looking to bring it to market, not sure where to start when it comes to marketing. I see a lot of companies think that they need to do a little bit of everything. I would argue it's completely the opposite. Stick to 1-2 things, execute them really well, take the learnings from them, then stack on your other channels. So if you're looking for a strategy of how to merge into the market, particularly in Canada, if a tech company, we're talking directly to consumers or have a marketplace, that's really my expertise there.
Fantastic. Great stuff. Well, that's probably a good point to close this show. So if you've been listening or watching this episode, I hope you find value from the discussion and you've been inspired by Susan's story. In our next episode, I'll be speaking to another fractional leader from another part of the world, so stay tuned for that one. Susan, thank you again for giving up your time to share your perspectives. I've really enjoyed the show, listening to your insights, and I wish you the very best of luck with your future journey.
Great. Thanks, Paul. And I'd be remiss as a Canadian if I didn't drop an A in here. I think I've made it the whole podcast without saying that. So have a great day, eh?
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.